Rudyard Kipling's famous poem entitled If consists of a father's advice to his son about what it takes to be a real man. The father imparts a series of if statements, saying that if his son can do this thing and this thing and this thing, there's like 25 things, in the end, if he can do all these things, then he'll be a man. One of the criteria in particular has always stood out to me, and it's this: if you can bear to hear the truth you've spoken, twisted by knaves to make a trap for fools. That may seem like a strange qualification for being a man, but it's actually incredibly insightful, because when you care about truth, as a real man should, it's genuinely painful to see it being twisted and misrepresented. It hurts to witness impressionable people being led astray by folly that you know is going to shipwreck their lives. Rudyard Kipling nailed it, and every time I dwell on that poem, I find my thoughts turning to the ideal of chivalry. Today, there's almost no social malady in the West that couldn't be ameliorated, if not eradicated, by a healthy dose of chivalry. But if that's the case, then why all the charges leveled against it in shrill and screeching tones? That it's a virulent expression of toxic masculinity, an oppressive and exploitative construct designed to legitimize violence and demean women. In truth, most people have a very poor understanding of chivalry on account of its having been, in the words of Kipling, twisted by knaves. Some of the knaves in question, who tend to congregate at institutions of higher learning, actually do have some semblance of an understanding about what chivalry is. And they hate it. They are the enemies of all that it represents, and so they twist it, portray it in ways that validate the postmodern narrative that they serve. But really, this is a very small group, all things considered. Most people, certainly most Americans, are just kind of misinformed and uninformed about chivalry. The first thing to understand is that chivalry, as an ideal, evolved slowly over time. It had an infancy, an awkward adolescence, and eventually it grew to maturity. It took time both to develop and to be adopted by the violent men who were its primary object. Chivalry's journey to becoming a refined set of principles is really the story of the increasingly successful efforts of the Church to rein in the abusive tendencies of Europe's warrior class, with a special concern to protect women and children, but also non-warriors in general. Just as Bushido is a distinct expression of Japanese culture at a particular time in history, chivalry is the peculiar fruit of a worldview specific to Europe during and in the wake of its Christianization. Now, I'm not making a case here for Christianity, but you simply can't separate the success of chivalry as an idea from the underlying belief system to which European knights felt increasingly beholden. As knights became almost universally convinced that they would face eternal damnation if they didn't behave in a Christian way, the Church got the leverage it desperately needed. Consequently, knights could be admonished with ever greater success to model their behavior after the central figure of their faith. Chivalry is, first and foremost, a martial code, and as such, it is singular among all the martial codes humanity has ever produced. This is a function of a paradox at the heart of the Christ story, a paradox that struck the medieval knight right between the eyes. Picture it. Here you had a class of men who above all else respected might and the capacity to inflict injury. To this extent, it's not hard to see why they would be impressed by a divine person of infinite might, who had the power to inflict punishment for all eternity. But that's where the comfort zone ended for the knight, because according to the church, this all-powerful Christ, for some reason, did not seem to take pleasure in throwing his weight around, but preferred rather to hold his might in reserve. He could be forceful, but had a strange penchant for compassion and meekness, especially towards women, children, and the sick. He was a king, but one more interested in serving than being served. Again, let me be clear. I'm not making a case for you to believe Christianity. All I'm saying is that medieval knights believed. They accepted the Christ stories as fact, and because they did, their martial code took on a unique quality that distinguishes it from all others in history. No other warrior code has ever had as its focus and model a servant king God-man, and it is the efforts of the medieval knights to emulate this figure that makes chivalry the most unlikely and unnatural marriage of opposites. Strength wedded to humility, ferocity to gentleness. So, why does all this matter? Who cares about the historic roots of chivalry? Well, one reason is because regardless of where you come down on Christianity, it's important to appreciate the evolution of your culture, how you got to where you are. Also, once you understand the story of chivalry, the present-day animus towards it has context. Given that all of the pernicious isms that constitute postmodern orthodoxy are reactions against Judeo-Christian traditions, all that strident shrieking from leftist academia suddenly makes sense. If you hear the word chivalry today, it's a 50-50 chance it will be as a part of the phrase, chivalry is dead. But I prefer to think of it as being on life support, with some encouraging signs that hint at the possibility of a strong recovery. One reason is that, to this day, the chivalric knight remains the prototype for many popular heroes in the West. Some of them even make direct reference to their heritage, like Batman, aka the Dark Knight, and the original Luke Skywalker, a Jedi Knight. Strange as it sounds, there's comfort to be found within the cognitive dissonance of your average Westerner. For all that many of them may regurgitate the politically correct slogans with which they've been indoctrinated, when they actually see chivalry in action, especially at the movies, their hearts swell. They cheer and applaud. They don't even realize that they are celebrating the very ideology of violence, oppression, and sexism that they profess to hate. And that's because, despite all the efforts of the knaves to twist the truth to make a trap for fools, somehow those fools, while perhaps a little muddled in their thinking, still know in their hearts that chivalry licks postmodernism hollow. There's so much more to say about what chivalry is and why, even in today's high-speed, high-tech world, it remains a wellspring of health and happiness for men, women, and children alike. But for the moment, since I don't want this video to be too long, I'll simply refer you to the links in the description below. They'll take you to some really fabulous content from other creators that I personally have found to be incredibly enlightening and encouraging. All right, guys, thanks so much for watching. I'm Marcus McGregor, and I'll see you next time. If you'd like to subscribe, go for it. Just remember that you won't be shown new videos when they post unless you also click the notification bell.